All right, so first announcements, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Napa Solano Audubon meeting. This is our February meeting, and our next meeting will be, it's here, will be Thursday, March 9th, I believe. I'll double check that. And we have a real treat next meeting. Let me just double check the date. I should have had this in my notes, but I don't know where it's a Thursday, March 13th, and we have Charlie Toledo, who is head of the Native American group here in our area, and she'll be presenting Native Americans' relationship to birds and how they interfaced with birds. So it should be great, and it will be held in Napa next month. So Thursday, March 13th, same time, 7 p.m. Our spring newsletter is just around the corner, so hold your breath. I'm sure there will be lots of fun surprises in our newsletter. And if you'd like to receive just the digital version, you don't need the printed version, let us know, because that helps us save paper and ink and resources. And you can always download the digital version online. And the bonus for getting the digital version is when articles that I write go way long, they're cut off in the printed version because we don't have enough space, but they're in the digital version. So we're trying to encourage everyone to go digital. All right, so next very important item is I'd like to thank all the volunteers that helped out at the Winged Migration Festival. It was the weekend before last in the pouring rain. So most of the field trips, unfortunately, were canceled, but the tabling and the presentations in the hall on Mare Island were sensational. And we had groups from all over the Bay Area, Audubon societies, wildlife societies. I had a friend come in from Ashland, Oregon, who presented on burrowing owls, Jeff Miller. And there was a lot of good things that happened there. So if you came and enjoyed it, you know, congratulations, but a special thanks to all the people who manned the Napa Solano Audubon table. Our new website is always changing. We always have the current events up there. So in case your email isn't regular, check our website. We have well over 2,000 photos of birds there for you to look at and improve your ID skills. We have an actual public folder where you can upload your best photographs, and then we'll post them on the website. And we're hoping we might have a photo contest later this spring if we have enough photographers with interest. What else is there? Important, our calendar is there. Our birding menu is there with all of our field trips. If you like birding, get a chance and go out with Andrew Ford, who leads our weekly walks. He's a sensational ornithologist, and he takes people to local hotspots in Napa and Solano counties, generally speaking, every Saturday. This Saturday, his work has called him out of town, so he won't be here this week, but he will the following week. We also have beginners walks at American Canyon Wetlands led by Carol Boykin, Tom Slaker, Karina Garcia, who two of them are in our audience, and they're great birders, and they go to the wetlands every single week, so they really know the birds that are there. I have a question for them though. Did they see the black skimmers that I saw there on Saturday? We rushed in from the hinterlands and ran out to the end of Glass Beach, and there, sure enough, in the mudflats, spotting scope view away, were 5 black skimmers. It's the second record only of them in Napa. The first record was Murray Berner, who says he saw them when he was a kid way out on the border with Solano County. So it wasn't that long ago. It was about maybe 15 years ago. It was a while ago. Yeah. So it's only the second record for black skimmers in Napa County, which is, you know, we're inland. They're basically a bird that breeds in the outer bays. So they've been moving north, and there's been sightings in Marin, there've been sightings in Sonoma, and so we finally lucked out and got a sighting here in Napa. Beginners bird walks are usually on Sundays, every other Sunday in American Canyon wetlands. They start at 9 and go till about noon, so 2 or 3 hours of birding for beginners. They're great with ID skills and can help you if you haven't been birding for a while. We even have loaner binoculars to loan out. Andrew's walks always start at 8 a.m., so he's there early, and he's a great ornithologist, and not only ornithologist, but he knows everything about plants and amphibians and every other organism. Our monthly trips, we lead at least one a month. This month's trip is to Sacramento National Wildlife Areas. It's next weekend, and unfortunately it's full. There's a waiting list. Typically, our monthly trips fill up the day that we send up the sign-up form. So if you're interested in joining us for a monthly trip, be on the lookout for our registration notice, which always comes out on a Saturday around 9, following the notice that tells you when it's coming out. So we're trying to give everyone a fair shot, and it's usually filled up by the end of the day. March's trip is to the Pinnacles National Monument. It will be March 24th and 25th, and we have some great leaders for that. Bruce Thompson and his friend. I always forget his friend's name because I've even birded with him, but it'll come to me some point. They're going to lead the trip, and hopefully I'll get to go too. Finally, a couple other notices. We still have many t-shirts, lots of women's t-shirts, lots of men's t-shirts, basically in all sizes. So if you don't own one of our beautiful t-shirts, can you bring one up? Can you bring one up? And we'll show you. I sometimes model it, but I have been teaching all day at American Canyon High School, so I didn't have time to put my t-shirt on. But here's one of our t-shirts. Hopefully you can see it. It's got what we call an American kestrel, but it's probably a Eurasian kestrel. And the new t-shirts that are coming, our label, our name will be much bolder than the old ones. But the old ones are cheap and they're going fast, so come and get them while they last. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I got everything here. Let's see, make sure. Okay, so I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. He is John Sterling. Tonight's program is Colombia birding, birding in Colombia. Colombia is one of the top birding spots in the world. There are almost 2,000 species in Colombia, so it's an incredible place to go birding. John will give you an overview of many of the top locations and some of the rare and endemic species that he's seen on his recent tours. From the Caribbean coast to the Pacific rainforest lowlands to the 3 ranges of the Andes and valleys in between, and the Orinoco lowlands bordering Venezuela. So he will introduce you to a lot of the incredible birds that are in this region. John Sterling probably needs no introduction. He's been a birder in California basically almost his whole life. He grew up in Napa with our very own Murray Burner, or close to Murray Burner, and Mike Parmeter and Phil Burton. They all grew up together birding. He was shown a pileated woodpecker in his 5th grade class, which is really parallel to my experience. I had a 4th grade teacher who introduced me to birds, and I've been birding ever since. And John is now a professional ornithologist. He's worked for Smithsonian Institute, U.S. Forest Service, and many other organizations. Most of his work has been throughout California, but now he has his company leads tours across the world. And I'll let him tell you about them so I don't misinform you. So I'm going to turn the program over to John Sterling, and he'll take my seat, and hopefully everyone will be able to hear him. Please, if you're online and you can't hear us, please unmute yourself and let us know.
All right. I first started coming to the Napa, Solano, Audubon meetings in 1971 when I was 11. And I came for several years and then moved over to Redwood Regional Ornithological Society over in San Rosa area and started going there with Mike Parmeter and John Parmeter and all those guys. So, all right.
Also, I'll share your program. I'm sorry.
Okay, yes. All right. So sterlingbirds.com is my website, and that's where you can get linked to my photo galleries. And I have a little over 100 photos of birds in my program tonight, because I don't, not enough time to show them all. But I've seen 980 species in Colombia in 3 trips, and photographed probably close to 900. I can't put them all in, so you can go to my website and look at all the other birds, and I'm not showing you tonight. All right, now how do you advance it?
What are you hitting? Try the keyboard.
Yeah, I'm doing the keyboard.
Okay.
I tried that.
Push down on it.
Just push down on it.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right, so you can see those yellow pins. Those are areas that I focused on in the last 3 tours, and there's still plenty of other areas to go to. It takes about 5 trips to do Colombia right, and each trip is about 2 to 3 weeks.
Is that better?
There's just a lot to see, a lot of diversity, and this kind of gives you an overview. On the left, or both, show the mountains, and Colombia is different from the rest of the Andean region in that the Andes split up into 3 ranges: the west, the central, and the east. And you can see those valleys in between, the Cauca Valley and the Magdalena Valley. And because of that, you have some isolation between populations, which increases biodiversity. And that mountain range at the very top there, that little brown spot on the Caribbean coast, that's Santa Marta Mountain. It gets up to close to 19,000 feet. It's the highest mountain on the coast in the world. And also, it's also geographically isolated. And of course, there's a lot of endemic species there as well. And then you have along the Venezuela area, you have kind of the llanos, the savanna areas, and down further south, you have more Amazonian rainforest. And on the Pacific coast there is a Chocó rainforest. And up on the Caribbean coast, that little peninsula that sticks up above Venezuela, that's actually kind of a dry semi-desert or desert. So a lot of diversity. Oh, I'm going to go back. And then on the right side, those yellow blobs, those are protected areas. So there's some good areas of protection, but a lot of the Andes are not protected, and there's a lot of deforestation. And this kind of gives you an overview of dry, wet, different ecoregions for plant types. So a lot of diversity. All right, so close to 2,000 species. There's a lot of subspecies that will likely be split as separate species in the coming years. More and more work with vocalization, analysis, and DNA work is showing that a lot of these birds are actually distinct species. All right, so we're starting at one of the best birds. My co-leader, Ken Rosenberg, on the right, he's a retired senior scientist at Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and one of my best friends for over 40 years. And the guy in the middle is a professor of geography, but also a landowner, a farmer, and his family owns a bunch of land near the town of Antioquia. This is more north of Medellin in the Western Andes. And he went to a conservation conference nearby, kind of local conservation, and one of the presenters was talking about birds. And he decided to throw in a photo of a specimen of a bird called the Antioquia brushfinch. There are 3 specimens that were collected 40 years ago, 50 years ago, something like that. And then analysis showed that they're actually different from the slaty brushfinch, which is common in the area. And it's actually a different species. So people went out looking. Of course, they never found them. And it's thought to be a lost species, extinct, likely extinct. And this guy said, well, wait a minute, I've seen that in my land. And the guy's, well, you know, it's a slaty brushfinch, very similar, and no, I really think so. So people came out and they searched some general areas. I couldn't find them. And they said, no, come to my property. So he went out there, and sure enough, there it was. The Antioquia brushfinch. So this is 2018 when it was rediscovered. And of course, a year and a half later, this is kind of in the middle of 2018, year and a half later, COVID hit. And so nobody could see it for a while. And then we came in 2022, and we're one of the first tour groups to see this bird. And you go to this little town, there's murals all over about the brushfinch, about some of the other birds too, but they're very proud of their brushfinch. Pretty spectacular. You see this tiny little range. Another bird that was discovered in 1999 is the chestnut-capped peahaw. And this is nearby. It's about 60 miles away, 2.5-hour drive through the mountain roads on another little part of the mountains. And where it's discovered, and what's been happening lately in Ecuador and Colombia is when a rare species or rediscovered species or a new species is found, conservation groups, foundations will purchase the land, and often will build a lodge for birders and scientists. And so that's what happened here with the chestnut-capped peahaw. You can go and stay there. It's a beautiful place. They have hummingbird feeders and bird feeders and beautiful trail systems and just wonderful birding. But that's where you can get this special species. Here's another bird that's highly fragmented. You can see on the western range, the northwest range, and then in the southern little blob, that's in the central Andes. And again, very isolated because of habitat destruction. They need good forest. This is a forest bird. It's not like our grackles here. And they often move around in flocks, and pretty spectacular. Now this is a fancy little bird, Chami antpitta. And if you've ever looked for an antpitta, you know they're impossible to see. They'll respond to a playback, but there are always 3 layers of vegetation behind. And this guy, Angel Paz from Ecuador, back in the mid-1990s, saw this antpitta and it was like really intrigued on his property. So he started, you know, I'm gonna be his friend. So he started like feeding it mealworms, and got it become tamed and come in every day, and he called it Maria. And he'd go out, Maria, Maria, and throw out the things, and Maria would come in and eat. And someone found out about it, and they did, and you know, because that's never been done before. And it turned out it was not only an antpitta coming to a feeder, it was a giant antpitta that had never been seen by living birders. No one even knew the vocalization. I was down there in the 80s and 90s, and we were going around trying to, any bird we heard, we thought that could be it, and it wasn't, you know. And but nobody knew the vocalization. So now that bird became very famous, and he trained 4 other species of antpittas on his property. So it's like one-stop shopping. You can go there, and they all have different times in the day. So you start off with the dark-backed wood quail at dawn. No, right after you see the cock of the rocks at dawn, and then the wood quail, and then you go to the next species, and then you end up with the giant antpitta, but you get 5 species of antpittas at different times of the day. And because of that, people started developing that technique in Peru, northern Peru mostly, and in Colombia. And this is a bird coming into a bird feeder in Colombia. And in fact, it takes between 6 and 18 months to train an ant pitta to come in regularly. So it's a lot of work, and they have to do it every day. So it's a big commitment. So anyways, this is a Chami ant pitta, and it is in the Rufous ant pitta complex. It was thought to be one species, and then vocalization work and DNA work in recent years found out that there are probably something like 12 species, and they all look very similar, but they're all very different, and they're all isolated geographically. So this is the one in the Western Andes. Here's another bird that's highly fragmented, and this used to occur all the way through the Western Andes, Central Andes, down into Ecuador. And they eat the fruits, and they nest in the trees of wax palms. And wax palms are the tallest palms in the world. They're an old growth species. They could live to 300 years to get, as tall as old growth. And unfortunately, the Catholic Church thought that the palm fronds are really great for Palm Sunday. So wipe them out. And these trees don't grow very fast. They don't, And so they were wiped out of Ecuador. I was in Ecuador in the 80s. We were looking for them, and they're gone. And they're gone from all southern Colombia. And Colombia at the time was off limits because of all the guerrilla warfare, civil war and all that. And they started finding them. And the first town is Jardín, Colombia in the Western Andes, kind of that one of the northern little dots there. It's a beautiful, beautiful town in the highlands. And they set up a nest box program, which is highly successful. And they're setting up nest box programs in the other areas with little dots. And they're slowly starting to expand their population, increase their population, expand it. Their range within those dots are getting bigger and bigger now, which is great. It's a large parrot, almost the size of a small macaw. It's a very, very special bird. This is a bird that, if you asked me in 1992 if I'd ever seen one in my life, I'd say, hell no. And now you can go see them. So it's pretty amazing. Here's another special bird found in the central part, endemic, the white mantled barbet. And you can see it's got a fairly big range. It's endemic to Colombia. But within that range, it's only found in really good shade coffee plantations and forest. There's not a lot left. So it's actually just little dots here and there within that range. It's a sooty ant tanager. It's a low-level species. They're down in the shrub layer, lower parts of the forest. And they go around in flocks, noisy flocks. And of course, the cock of the rock. And they're around. If you go to Jardín, Colombia, it's the best spot to see them because there's a restaurant there, and there's blinds and walkways and a little canopy thing, and there's always, at least 10 males calling in that area at all times. And they're pretty easy to hear because they sound like a bunch of loud pigs at a pig trough. Really wild, I just can't even, I don't even want to try to mimic it. But very loud. And they're a lekking species, so the males are all dancing and calling, and then the female will come in and check each male out and decide who she's going to mate with. So they're competing. It's another special bird, the black and gold tanager, another endemic. And within that range, it's actually very narrow elevational range, sort of kind of the lower mid elevation, and so it's a very small amount of acreage that they actually live in. And again, an area where it's a lot of deforestation. So there's a place called Montezuma Hill Road, and it's an area forest is protected for the water agencies, and that supply water to Cali, a lot of the other cities. So they need to preserve the watershed, and it's just a fantastic place. Here's Ken on the left again, me, and then the young guy on the right. He's the son of the guy in the dark glasses in the middle, and he's a bird guide and speaks English, and he's 20 years old and just great. But his dad owns this property that we're going to go up to. It's about a 45-minute four-wheel drive road up the mountain there. And they have a very, very special bird. And here's we are looking for it. And we're going to go to a hide where he took him 12 months to bring in this bird that was discovered in 1994 by Peter Kaestner. Was out birding with some Colombian guides and heard this ant pitta that he didn't know and taped it in. It's a new species. It was a new species. And only found in that one little spot south of Bogota, about a 2-hour drive south of Bogota. Cundinamarca ant pitta. So you never know. There could be new species out there waiting for us. There's a blue-throated star frontlet, one of the fancy hummingbirds. This is the eastern Andes, coming to this one spot with this beautiful house, old colonial mansion that is full of hummingbird feeders and hummingbird gardens, and you get a bunch of birds there. My last tour at Colombia, we had 70 species of hummingbirds, 70, and I've probably seen 120 species in Colombia, or at least 110 in the different areas, so a lot of hummingbirds. Next place we're going to go to is Inarita. This is on the Venezuelan border, right on the Orinoco River area. And this is a really interesting area. It's got some patches of forest and then some open grasslands and scrublands. And you can see on the map there, the dots are too small on the big map. It's just this tiny little area. And that north-south border, that's the Venezuelan border, and that's the Orinoco River. So a couple spots for the species there, and that's the Inarita River that goes off to the left. And that little area there, and we went to see this one, the Orinoco softtail. Very, very range restricted. And they're only found along the rivers in riparian habitat. Here's Ken and I, and that's riparian, a little bit different riparian habitat. And this is the exact point where this species was discovered about 4 years ago. The Inarita ant shrike, completely new, and it's got a big spider in its bill. You saw that. Also, the Inarita area has white sand forest. And white sand forest is a very specialized habitat in the Amazonia. It's very rare, very patchily distributed, and there's a whole suite of birds that are only found in white sand forest. It's structurally, it just looks like this, not very biodiverse botanically. But you get things like bronzy jacamar, citron-bellied attila, brown-banded puffbird. You can see all the little dots. And those big patches there, the white sand forest it's just found tiny little fragments within those big blobs. So it's a little bit misleading, but just tiny little spots. And there's a few others that I'm not going to show because I don't have time. Oh, the Yapacana antbird. Fancy. In the nearby forest, one of my favorite birds, a collared puffbird. All puffbirds are great, but collared puffbirds are pretty special. Puffbird family.
What are they closely related to?
They're closely related to kingfishers and jacamars, kind of that group.
Like 6 or 8 inches long, something like that.
About like that. Yeah, it's not. It's yeah, sizable. They always look bigger to me because I got big binoculars. And they look huge, and they're so fancy. If I was describing this, they're like this big, but they're not. We actually, when you hold specimens in your hand, I'm always shocked at how small birds are when you actually look at a specimen, because my eyes light up. Here's another range-restricted species, warbling. This is the Emiri warbling antbird. When I first started working in the Amazon in the late 80s, there's one species of warbling antbird, and then they've vocalizations and DNA, and there's a little bit of subtle differences in plumage, and they've split up with several different species. And the pompadour cotinga, the only bird that, the only other bird that has, when it's described as a wine purple. There's a wine-throated hummingbird from Central America, but and this is pretty sizable bird, robin size. And they're in these savanna areas, white sand forests, and kind of little open areas. And even in the Amazon, if there's a big clearing, they'll come into the clearings, but they're not an interior forest bird. White-naped seed eater is another special one, highly range restricted, and it's rare within its range. And it's a very large seed eater. And of course, purple-breasted cotinga. It's very iridescent, shockingly so. And it was a really distant photograph, so you don't see the shimmering purple underneath. And along the river, actually, we are really lucky to see this bird, the Orinoco goose. This bird has been wiped out, hunted out in a lot of areas where there's people. And in fact, our local guide, Pablo Flores, he's the one to discover the Inarita ant shrike. This is the first time he'd seen Orinoco goose in that whole area, ever. When I worked in Ecuador, there hadn't been records in years. They're pretty much wiped out there. And when I worked in southeast Peru in the Amazon down there, they weren't around at all. So it was pretty special. I think they're starting to make a little bit of a comeback. Okay, next, let's go up to the Santa Marta Mountains. And if you want, you could take a 2-day trek with donkeys, mules, to get up high enough in elevation for the I think it's the blue-throated helmet crest and the Santa Marta wren, which are only found up in the highest area. And I haven't been up there yet. But we're on the little ridge, one of these lower ridge areas, and the ridge tops have a number of species that are only found on these ridge tops, not downslope or in between, but only on the ridge tops. It's a specialized little forest. And it's a little bit of a drive up to get to the reserve. And there's a beautiful lodge there, great food, and bird feeders and everything, and trails. So lots of birds. Coppery emerald. All these things are endemic to the mountain area. Santa Marta blossom crown. The brush finch. And a mountain tanager. Black-headed tanager. Golden-breasted fruit eater. There also are found in the western Andes and central Andes, but they're very difficult to find there. They're very rare, and Santa Marta Mountain's the best place to see them. And fruit eaters are really special. They're related to the Caatingas. I love all fruit eaters are awesome. And the yellow-crowned redstart. This is a ridgeline species, getting insects off the windshield, and it saw an intruder in the mirror, and then moved from the mirror to the window. Yeah. White Lord warbler. There's also a Santa Marta warbler, which I didn't put a photograph in. And here you can see on the map there, it's that little squiggly line. That's like the ridgetop line. So very, very rare bird. A lot of bird tour groups miss this bird, but we saw 2 of them. Santa Marta bush tyrant is a flycatcher. And the Santa Marta parakeet, which is also often missed. It's very kind of nomadic. They follow fruiting trees where there's fruits. And we were lucky. We saw several of them on our first morning up there. And, of course, this white-tailed star frontlet. It was a spectacular hummingbird coming to the hummingbird feeders at the lodge. And hot off the press last year, the Santa Marta saberwing, which is a hummingbird, was rediscovered after not having been seen or documented in several decades. And now it was on indigenous community land on the east side, southeast slope of the mountain where birders hadn't been really going to before. There's no, there's been work with conservationists and with the indigenous community, and now they're allowing birders to go in there. So my next trip to Colombia, we're going to do that. They get the Santa Marta saberwing. I don't have a photo of it. Okay, next we go up to the Guajira Peninsula in the dry Caribbean forest. And you get another puff bird, russet-throated. And white-whiskered spine-tail. Vermilion cardinal, the male on the left, female on the right. Yeah, and a bunch of other species. Yeah, too many species to add in. And they're all flycatchers. You're not going to be interested in the flycatcher. So let's go down to the Central Andes and the Chocó. This is where my last trip was, and it was a fantastic crew. Steve Kelling, the guy with the big lens on the right. He's the one who was a mastermind behind the Avian Knowledge Network at Cornell Lab, which created Merlin and eBird and all that. He was a mastermind behind all that, got all the grants, hired all the people. And so he's the big guru. He's retired now. And so I had a lot of Cornell scientists on this trip. They all just retired in the last year or two. So the guy, Paul Rodwald, Birds of the World, head of the Birds of the World program for Cornell, using the trip, and on. Lots of folks.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Birds of the World is a great resource with a lot of information on every bird in the world. It's an amazing website. I think it costs like $45 or $50 to join for a year, but it's a wealth of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We had the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's top polar bear expert on the trip. All kinds of folks. It's good. So we went down to this one little town so that's the Chocó lowlands in the Pacific coast there, in the lowlands in the west. And the Chocó area is highly endangered. It goes from a little bit of Panama down into northwestern Ecuador. It's an ecoregion. A lot of it's cut down for oil palm plantations, bananas, whatever. And there are areas, and there's very few spots in Colombia which you actually can access. There's no roads or it's dangerous. But we were able to go to this one town to see the Baudo oropendula, which is, whoops, very, very special bird. It's got that pink cheek. It's in the oropendula group. It's related to caciques and orioles, blackbirds. But it's a very big. So it is literally this big. Yeah. And we went to this place to get this bicolored antpitta coming to a feeder. Rio Blanco in the Central Andes. And then this is another bird that was, back in the 1980s, this is almost unknown. The vocalizations were unknown. It was called a Western ant shrike, was the name. And then people, they started figuring out, finding this bird. It was kind of a mythical bird. They learned that, they got the calls, recorded the calls, songs. Then they did DNA analysis, and it's not an ant shrike at all. It's an ant vireo. So now it's called the bicolored ant vireo. And the female's on the left, which is much prettier than the male. And it's just a really rare bird to get. We have this on Montezuma Hill. And the black-tipped cotinga, another very, very difficult to find bird. They need primary rainforest. They're a fruit-eating bird. And this is a young male. The adult males are all white, pure white. Not really. Well, it's cloudy, so they do sit on treetops. So on a cloudy day, treetop. This is also in the Central Andes. This is another endemic, like the bicolored antpitta. This is another endemic bird to the Central Andes of Colombia. Coming to a feeder. And this is the helmet crest. This is a buffy helmet crest. I mentioned the blue-throated. I think it's blue-throated green. It might be green-throated. The one in Santa Marta Mountain. And then there's another one. So this one's the Central Andes in this one little area, and they're above tree line. They're in the alpine area, in the shrubs. And there's one just south of Bogota in the eastern Andes, and there's another one up in the Andes in Venezuela. And very small ranges, all four. But really, really cool bird. This is a calcaguan. You can see the little dots there. Back in the early 90s, it was thought to be extinct. And then I was there in, about 2000, when was it, 2008 or something like that. And they were known from 2 of those little dots. And now they're found in 6 dots. But tiny, tiny little areas, little tiny preserves. And guans are large, turkey-sized birds. They're first birds to be hunted out if you have people with guns, clear them all out. And they need good forests or fruit-eating birds. But they're easy to find in this one place, Otun Cambayo.
Was the helmet crest the previous bird? Is that a small bird, like a hummingbird? Or?
It's a hummingbird.
Yeah.
It's a hummingbird, but it's we think of our hummingbirds are all about Anna's size. You go down there, they're all from starling size down to bee size, and anything in between. So it's a hummingbird, but it's maybe this big, probably twice the bulk of Anna's, and 1.5 the size. This is another rare bird. It has a fairly large range, but it's very, very rare. It's the first one I've ever seen this last trip. It's a mythical bird. So it's even within the range, you're probably not going to see it unless you get lucky. We had 3 of them all together in this last trip in Montezuma Hill, white-faced nunbird. And they're in the puffbird family, along with monklets as well, lanceolated monklet. Chestnut wood quail. Wood quail are actually also very difficult to see. You can hear them. But this is coming to a feeding station. Chestnut wood quail. Ooh. Okay, this is a bird. You can see those tiny little dots. That biggest dot there, that's Montezuma Hill. And birders went up to the top of the hill where there's some radio antennas and discovered the species. And it's only found at the very tops of these hills, of these these mountains. And so very, very small range, very small population. The chestnut belly flower piercer. It's called a flower piercer because it's got a little hook on the tip of the bill. And what they do is they rob nectar from tubular flowers. Like you have a sword-billed hummingbird with a bill this long, goes after flowers like that. It'll put a little hole at the base and eat the nectar, and that without pollinating. Which is why they're called, they're klepto. Right? So they're not providing any use for the plant. So this is a very special flower piercer. And Choco porowill is the bird I really wanted to see. I had missed it in northwest Ecuador because they weren't calling, and it was a fantastic bird. Again, it's in that Choco region. There's a lot of habitat destruction and a lot of very little access to any of that area in Colombia, and we went and got it. This is another really difficult bird to get. It's very, very rare. It's got a little zigzag line. It's found in the western Andes, but only in a very narrow elevational range. Above them is the Andean pygmy, and below them is Peruvian's pygmy. And so they're in between, and very narrow little elevational range. And they also don't respond to playback. They won't come in at all. So I've heard them a couple times before, but we were really lucky to see one in the day this last trip. Here's another endemic ant tanager, the crested. Again, found in good shade coffee plantations and primary forest, mostly. And the golden ring tanager. This is related to the black and gold tanager that I showed earlier. Again, it's tiny little range, and it's a little higher elevation than the black and gold. So it's a little bit more of a upper mid elevation zone. Again, tiny little range, tiny elevational zone, but spectacular bird. When I first started looking at bird books around the world, when I was a kid, elementary school, this bird stood out, and oh man, I want to see one of those. And then the 80s and 90s came, and you couldn't go to Colombia. So now you can go and see them. This is another highly desirable high elevation cloud forest parakeet that's in the same area as the yellow-eared parrot that I showed earlier. In fact, they're in the same location. So we got these guys, golden plumed parakeet, beautiful cloud forest bird. And here's a bird that's restricted to the Cauca Valley, which is in between the western and the central Andes, the grayish piculette. The piculettes are woodpeckers, but they're tiny. They don't they don't have, their tail isn't strong or long enough, so they don't perch like a woodpecker. So they hop around like nuthatches. And they nest in cavities, like a good woodpecker, and they peck around. And this is a really good one. This is our last morning. This is the last trip where we had the Calcaguan at Otinquimbaya, which is not on that map because it's a new spot. So it's found like in that one little spot in Venezuela, and then down southern, and this new spot in between. Very, very high pitched call. The call was not known until recently. And yeah, there are very few people have ever seen this bird up until the last like 2 or 3 years. And it's a tiny little ant pitta. It's only about this big. Little butterball. And this is another really rare bird. It's got a large range, but within that range, it's very, very difficult to find. They're never in the same place for very long. So even like in Ecuador, there's a lot of area in Ecuador, but it averages maybe once a year, one is found for more than 1 day at a location. And that it might be around for like a week or two. And if you're not there, you're not going to see it. And I spent a lot of time in its habitat, and this is the first time I've ever seen one. And we were really lucky, super excited. The masked saltator. It's very different from all the other saltators. So it's a very special bird. In fact, in southern Ecuador, I was there at this place called Cajanuma, part of Podocarpus National Park near the Peruvian border, in 1988. And there was a record 6 months before that. And I went back in 88, 89, 90, 91, and it has never been seen since early 1988, even now. And in fact, what really pisses me off is that I spent a lot of time there, and the next year after I was last there, there's a new species of Cotinga discovered right there where I was. But again, it's also rare. It's not always there. It's just like, oh, the chestnut-bellied Cotinga. So anyways. So this is outside of Cali. This is coming to a feeding area, which is why I got these amazing photos. I shouldn't say that, but came to a feeder. So I have lots of photos of this on my website, different photos from different angles. But again, endemic bird to kind of a lower mid-elevation Andean forest in the western and central Andes. And the Munchiki ant wren, this is another one that was just discovered a few years ago. Again, on Montezuma Hill, where that chestnut-bellied flower piercer was, they noticed the wood wrens there were sounding different from the ones in lower elevation, like 3 kilometers down the road, and recorded them and then analyzed the DNA, and it's a completely different species. They look very similar, but the songs are totally different, calls are totally different. So it's only found in these ridge tops, and then since then they've explored other areas with that similar habitat, and so it's endemic. It's these narrow little areas. Munchiki wood wren. Ocellated tapaculo, super hard bird to see, absolutely spectacular. And Parker's antbird. This is named after an old friend of mine, Ted Parker, who died tragically in a plane crash in 1994. He was 40 years old, and he was the expert for South American birds. He was by far and away the guy. And so when he died, a lot of knowledge was lost because he didn't write a lot. And but Fortunately, I got to talk to him a lot, so I remember everything he said. And so did everybody else who knew him. He was a fountain of knowledge, and he was an associate with LSU Museum Natural. That
Are they going to keep his name on this bird?
over my yeah. The South American folks are not going to let that go. No. In fact, a lot of Latin American ornithologists don't want to change the names because they're starting to find species and they want to name them after people too. And there's plenty of Chico Mendes, the famous Brazilian conservationist who was murdered a few years ago, and there's a tyrannulet named after him, Chico's tyrannulet. I'm not going to take that name away. But anyways, so this bird was it was thought to be part of another species until they found out, they realized the songs and calls are completely different. And it looks exactly like the other one, the males. And then they looked at the females are different. And the songs are different calls. So this is endemic to these valley areas in between the Andes. Parker's antbird. Rufous-fronted parakeet. This is another rare bird. See that? And found only in these little ridge tops in this high central Andes, and they're nomadic. So you can go to one place where you've seen them before, and many times you never see them again. Because they're moving around. We got super lucky, eye level, right alongside the road. A flock of about 12 of them. Really fancy bird and highly endangered as well. Another endangered species, rusty-faced parrot, very similar elevation zones, but also in the eastern Andes, so central and eastern Andes. And difficult to find. And the tanager finch. This is a bird that's easy to hear. They have this little whistle, but almost impossible to see. It's the first time I've ever actually seen one. Came right out in the open. Super lucky. And they're only found in the West Andes. And they're in dense bamboo and dense understory. Very skulky. In Tolima dove, you can see that tiny little range. They're only found in the Magdalena Valley, and most of the Cauca Valley and Magdalena Valleys have been pretty much converted to agriculture. So there's very, very little native habitat left. And so we went to this little preserve owned by a local guide and his family. And they have a little restaurant there, and you go there and stay. And they have hummingbird gardens and feeders. And this thing was coming into some seed. And it's a wonderful place to hang out for a morning. It's also a spot for the Tolima blossom crown with a very similar range, really tiny range. Back over, we're jumping around back over the West Andes, and this gets down into Ecuador, and it's pretty rare in Colombia, even though it's got a lot of this range in Colombia. But you go to this one place that has bird feeders, and there's a pair that nests in a cavity in a tree right next to the bird feeders. Super easy.
Do barbets have a comparable bird in the U.S.? Is there
No.
Nothing up here.
No. In fact, barbets were considered one family until they started looking at them closely in the DNA and everything else. And the toucan barbet and a prong-billed barbets in Central America, toucan barbets in this area, they're a distinct family, two species in that family. Then you have all the other South American barbets, are another family. And then you have the Asian barbets in a family, and then you have the African barbets in another family. So there's now 4 families of barbets. And they're related to woodpeckers. They nest in cavities. They're frugivores, fruit-eating birds. It's another special, spectacular bird, amazing bird, fantastic bird, tiny little range, beautiful. They always are found in this one species of tree. It's a very large tree, and they're rarely found outside that tree. So they're easy to find. You just have to find that species of tree that's large enough, and you hang out long enough. And it took us 20 minutes to see this bird in this tree, but came out. Turquoise Dacnus, tiny little range. So another one is in the Magdalena Valley, the yellow-headed brushfinch. Again, highly fragmented range, very small population, a lot of habitat destruction. So we got to see this one. All right. So now we're just going to go into some eye candy. You ready for that? Not that the other birds were nice. This is a cool bird. Red-rumped woodpecker, another choco species, Andean species. Velvet purple coronet, hummingbird. Empress brilliant, very large hummingbird. This is a bay-headed tanager, but it's different from the other bay-headed tanagers. The other bay-headed tanagers are blue underneath. This is green. This is the Santa Marta subspecies, which is probably going to be a separate species. White-whiskered puffbird. Little tinmoo. Tinmoos could be hard to find. This was coming to a bird feeding station. Andean motmot. Black-capped tanager. Black-billed mountain toucans. These are high elevation cloud forest species, as well as this one, gray-breasted mountain toucan. Yeah. Yellow-collared chlorophonius is a choco endemic. It gets down into the Choco and Ecuador. Tiny little guys, often in the tops of trees.
So is most of your time spent in the cars, looking along the road, or hiking on trails?
Yeah, well, depends. This last trip, we went to a lot of feeding stations. So it was very relaxing, drinking hot chocolate. You got your camera right here. You pick up, enjoying. It was a little more relaxing than some of the trips. So it depends on where you are. But we did a fair amount of hiking as well. You can't really do car birding and bird from a car, really. It doesn't really work in the tropics. So, yeah, combination of feeding stations and walking along roads. Walking on trails is okay, but you get more visibility along it like a road because it's just much more visible. But for some birds, you really need to get on the trails to get some of these skulking birds. But yeah, so it's a little combination. There's a hummingbird. It's a tiny little hummingbird with a really long tail, black-tailed train bearer. Chestnut woodpecker. Lots of good woodpeckers down there. There's broad pepper shrike. This is a species that comes all the way into southern Mexico. Southern Mexico to northern Argentina. This is another one of the mountain tanagers. Lots of different mountain tanagers. Toucanets. Pearl tree runner. This is the Fernereid family, which is kind of all the little brown jaws that put all together in one little family. Golden tanagers are pretty common. There's also a lot of geographic variation in golden tanagers. So The farther south you go, the more brown on the head. So you get down into Bolivia, and there's lots of brown in the breast and all over the head and everything. So lots of different subspecies. Everybody likes an owl, crested owl, pretty spectacular. It's a fairly large owl. And quetzals, golden-head quetzal. It's a cool little hummingbird. It's also above tree line. Of course, another barbet. In the rain, see the raindrops? Silver-throated. Silver, gold, and emerald. The violet-tailed sylph. We don't just look at birds. This is a grasshopper. And what time is it now?
We're 8:10, that's fine, we're doing.
Okay, I'm almost done, pretty much done. So I've got into moths, photographing moths. So I bring a moth trap, a moth light. And in Montezuma, in 3 nights, mostly one night, we got just a couple hundred species of moths coming in. Pretty spectacular. It's just a few. And I did put a moth photo gallery on my website, and probably tomorrow I'm going to label them. But you can go out and there's put like 105 photos of moths on there of different species, and this is just a little snapshot. There's so many weird looking things, and it's really cool. And I'm really excited. I took a lot of moth photos in Borneo. I was in Borneo in July. Got like 350 species there. And I'm bringing my moth stuff set up to Cambodia, because there's some really good spots in Cambodia. And I'm seeing moth photos from Cambodia every day now in my Facebook feed. And ready to go. In Taiwan. So anyway, lots of cool stuff. We like that when we go on our trips. Mammals is always a big thing. India, we saw tiger, leopard, sandbar deer, black buck, lots of stuff. Oh, Asiatic wildcat, which are local guides who work in the Desert National Park, had never seen one as well, ever. So that was, and that's the cat that was domesticated and became our cat. There's a wild cat in Europe, and there's a wild cat in Africa. They're all very similar, but it's the Asian one that was actually domesticated, not the African or the European one.
Is there a time of year that's best for Colombia?
Not really. Well, it depends on where you go, because you have rainy seasons are different in different parts of the country. So you really want to avoid the rainy season. So it depends on where you're going. I had trips there in Ecuador and Colombia in July, August, December, February. So it depends on where you're going. Yeah. Oh, here's some more moths. Yeah. Here's a couple more.
Look at the antenna.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The antennas.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. That's one of the wasp mimics.
Yeah.
And then here's my website. I've got all my California county birding thing there, so you can check that out. and then photos, tours. And I haven't done any workshop. I used to do workshops a lot, but I just haven't been doing them for years. I did a weekend goal workshop for many years. We haven't done it for 10 years, so it's time to do it again. But it's first time I did it. I did the lecture, and I finished, and everybody was like, writing everything diligently, and at the edge of their seat and everything, eyes wide open. And I stopped. I felt really tired. I talked for 6 hours straight. It's like, holy shit, I can't do that again. So we break it up a little bit. But there's a lot to talk about. And now I got to talk about Vega goal and Mongolian goal and all these other stuff. But we go through all the goals, and then we do an afternoon field trip, and that's on Saturday and Sunday. We go to the coast and do more and just practice. We start off with how to age a goal. You have the first year, second year, third year, and fourth year. Some only have 3 years, but we go through all that. And once you learn how to identify the age classes, that really helps you out. And then we go from there to all this other stuff. Wingtip pattern, eye ring color.
It's only a question on when you'll be committed. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can go insane, if that's what you mean. But yes, but goals are great. But anyways, so there you go. And the county birding is, I have color-coded maps for, I started this, I kind of started promoting this back in the late 70s, but other people, Rich Stalkup and John Luther, the first ones to start it around 1972, is keeping track of your counties, all 58 counties, list for all 58. It's a good way to learn distribution of the state and also get you out there and get you all these weird places that you never go. And so my website, I have a spreadsheet with everybody's totals, and I have 135 people on there, and then each person has a color-coded map. And you start out, if you're under 100, it's a white on the county. If you get to 100, it's blue, dark blue, then it goes to light blue, then green, then yellow, and then purple, and then red, and you get to 400, it's black. And so it really kind of incentivizes people to get to certain levels.
Yeah.
And so it's fun. Yeah. And it's really gotten people out to a lot of counties that birders just kind of avoided, or just didn't really go to. Even counties that don't have any local birders living there, and discovering all this weird stuff, all this great stuff. So it's been really good to kind of promote, and we've learned a lot about distribution and vagrancy, finding vagrant birds in places that you wouldn't expect them because nobody looked. Everybody's going to Point Reyes or Monterey or, places like that.
Unfortunately, Lucas is a county bird. So I have to take
But no, he's not on my website yet.
he's not? Oh,
I
really?
don't think so.
Maybe
I
not.
mean, I know Lucas Corneliuson is.
Oh, is he?
I don't know about Stevenson guy, that Stevenson character.
He's good.
Yeah. But if he's not, he should be on. He should be on there and create the map for him. I don't remember if he is or not. But anyways, but yeah.
Wow. Let's give him a nice hand for that. You want to have questions? I'm sure you have some questions, so have at it.
Conservation issues.
Click on that chat button. There might be some questions in the chat.
All right, how do I do that?
If you can find the cursor
I got the cursor.
and then go down where that chat, see the number 7 there?
Oh yeah.
Yep, there you go. Click on that. And there. Oh, we hear fine.
We hear fine. Can someone tell me how to see the slideshow?
Oh, boy.
Or
Oh, that might have been, well, no, that was after a while. Okay.
Pictures are coming along well in my system. Okay, that person said I got it.
All right, so maybe no questions. Well, I bet we have questions.
Oh, can barely hear you. Oh, because I'm moving my voice.
Yeah.
Ay,
Yeah.
I should be facing the other. Oh, that's hard.
One question I have is,
Sure.
Is there a field guide that's really good for Colombia or South America? Do you recommend one?
Yeah, there's the Lynx edition. It has the most updated taxonomy. There's the old book by Steve Hilty that came out in the early 80s, and it revolutionized. It's like the first great modern bird book for Latin America. And but there's a number of new ones now. But the Lynx edition is really good. I think Hilty worked on that one too. And it's from the Birds of the World thing. And so it's all pretty current.
So I've never been to Colombia, but what I noticed is the families are from Costa Rica are there. Almost every bird we have is a family that has a representative in Costa Rica or some other place.
Right. Yeah. So what I recommend people who are starting into the neotropics, you start in Mexico, and then you go to Mexico and you get a few interesting families and only a few individuals in some of these families, and then you go down to Costa Rica, that area, Panama, and you get more families, and then you got more species in the other families that you saw. So it gets a little more complicated, and then you go down to South America, and it's a lot more families and a lot more birds, and so we get well over 500 species on every trip. I had a northern Peru trip last year. We had 700 species. No, it was more than 2 weeks. That was 24 days. But this last trip, 2 weeks, we had 580, something like that. Yeah. So it's just a lot, and it depends on where you go to. Yeah.
You talked about that one owl that was at a certain elevation, and there was a different owl below it, a different above it.
Yes.
What restricts it actually from going up and down? Is it
Nobody knows.
this is strange.
The habitat is maybe a little bit different. The trees are a little bit different, but they eat birds and lizards and things like that. And there's birds and lizards and up and down the slope. It could be competitive exclusion. The Andean pygmy owls are bigger. They have bigger heads, so maybe they can chase them down. But then why don't the Andean pygmy owls come farther down? Nobody knows. It's just like specialization. Yeah. There's nothing about leaf structure in the trees that are really all that different. Because there is such a thing that's called neophobia in birds, where some species have an innate fear of novelty, novel habitat structure that they don't like. They avoid it. Swamp sparrow versus song sparrow. Song sparrow is not neophobic. Swamp sparrow is. So swamp sparrows only like certain vegetation structure. And song sparrows can be very plastic in their habitat. My old boss at Smithsonian, Russ Greenberg, discovered that. And neophobia is known from human studies, and thought, well, maybe birds have it, and did all these experiments. And sure enough. And so now we know that neophobia does exist in some birds. But no, yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think anybody's looked at that, and I don't know how do I answer that? It's just a mystery.
You got 4 new messages here.
Okay. You might have to like scroll sometime. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, those people didn't face the storm to come out.
Oh, you got that, there's Bill's.
There's Phil. I just got back from John's trip, an incredible trip. But the most amazing thing was John's amazing knowledge, a breadth of knowledge. Whoopee!
Did you give him the flu?
Yeah.
No, I didn't give him the flu. He's
What's incredible though is so many of these species are so similar. So keeping it in your mind how to distinguish the different species is really a trick. I'm
Well,
impressed.
for me, my main thing when I wake up in the morning, what continent am I on? And then what country am I in? And what season? And once I figure that out, then I can kind of, oh yeah, okay. And now I don't know what I'm doing. It gets confusing. Yeah.
Of his brain is gotta find the right spot.
Yeah. But so conservation issues. What happened with coffee is a shade plant, and I was involved with the first work on shade coffee when I was at Smithsonian. Worked in southern Mexico, Chiapas, and then worked again in Peru. And my colleagues worked in Panama and Costa Rica and Guatemala. And so coffee is from Ethiopia. It's a shade plant. And what happened is during the Green Revolution in the 60s, they developed a strain of coffee, Robusta, that was able to be sun tolerant if you give a lot of fertilizers and put a lot of pesticides in it. So then it changed the whole equation. So Colombia was a country that had a lot of capital, a lot of money. So they were able to invest in all that chemical input to keep the plants alive. It has a higher yield, but it's lower quality, and the plants don't live as long. So they're taken out of production more often. And then you have soil loss, right? So a lot of problems. So Colombia was one of the first, so they cut a lot of the trees down. So a lot of sun coffee. It's terrible. It's a desert, biological desert. But there are some areas that still have some shade coffee. But you have Mexico, on the other hand, had a lot of the farms were small farmers. They'd have capital, so they kept a lot of shade coffee there. And in Cuba as well. And in El Salvador was not, because they had, most of the country was rich, owned by a few families that had a lot of money. So they plowed everything in. So it really depends on where you are, and the geopolitics, the economics and everything played a role. So unfortunately, Colombia did lose a lot of land. And then also with the US government going down and basically spraying all the coca plantations in Peru and Bolivia, wiped them all out for the cocaine industry, and the Coca-Cola is the largest importer of coca leaves because they use the coca leaves for their drink, their flavoring for Coca-Cola. So what happened is that, well, okay, the Colombians said, okay, well, we'll grow the coca here. So then they started cutting down all this forest, which is terrible. And now it's happening a little bit in Ecuador. So yeah, it's a bummer.
So what about ecotourism? I know Costa Rica has sort of taken that on, and it's really changed the country.
Yeah.
Is that happening in Colombia some?
Yes. Ecuador had a head start, and parts of Peru, where I worked in the late 80s in the Amazon in Peru, on the Manu River, Tamapata River, that's been going on for a while now. So that's really well with Cusco and Machu Picchu. and all that. That's pretty well developed for a while. But northern Peru is getting there now, more and more. We just did a northern Peru trip last year, and there's more lodges there, lots of fancy birds there, really good birds. And in Ecuador, Mindo area, when I first went there in the late 80s, there was one little hotel, one little, 2 blocks, this little town, and now it's just like huge ecotourism area, huge. And there are lodges all over, away from the town now, scattered around the hills, and there's lodges on the other side of the mountain, on the east slope now. There's this whole string of lodges going down elevations and stuff, and so it's fantastic. Southern Ecuador is getting there because there's a lot of rare birds. That's another show. A lot of new species discovered or rediscovered, and they're building lodges. They built lodges in protected areas around those, so there's a whole circuit there now. And then Colombia, in the last 10 years, has really developed pretty well. So there's a lot of lodges, a lot of good places to stay. So it's exploding. And also, because of that, or in conjunction, is that there's a lot of local guides, there's a lot of professional ornithologists now who are in conservation, and there's a lot of local guides who are not, university trained, but they're top-notch bird guides. And a lot of them are working at these lodges and these preserves, and so there's an explosion of knowledge, and of course, they're all out looking for things. And in the old days, it was just a few of us in Ecuador and in Peru running around looking for stuff. And now there's lots and lots of people, and they're there all the time. So the knowledge of distribution has exploded, and that's why they're finding new species, and finding birds in places where they weren't known before. And so it's amazing what's happening.
Any other questions? Let's give John a really nice hand.